The rain fell like a whisper against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the gallery, each droplet tracing its own path down the glass, solitary, inevitable, and gone before anyone could truly notice. Elena Winters stood before a painting she'd seen 1,000 times, her reflection ghosting over the canvas in the dim evening light. At 47, she had learned to recognize herself in fragments: the elegant line of her neck, the silver threading through her dark hair that she refused to dye, the fine lines around her eyes that mapped every disappointment, every lesson learned too late. The gallery was nearly empty. It always was on Thursday evenings, which was precisely why she came. Solitude had become her most faithful companion over the past 8 years, ever since her divorce, ever since she'd discovered that the man she'd built her life around had been building another life entirely with a woman young enough to be his daughter. The cliché of it still burned, not because it had been predictable, but because she'd been so thoroughly blindsided by her own naivety. "You're here again." The voice came from behind her, low, measured, with the kind of quiet confidence that suggested its owner had never needed to raise it to be heard. Elena didn't turn immediately. She'd noticed him over the past few months, this man who appeared at the gallery with the same reverent solitude she brought. He was younger than her. That much was obvious from the glimpses she'd allowed herself. Mid-30s, perhaps. Tall, with the kind of contained intensity that made him impossible to ignore even when he stood perfectly still. "I could say the same about you," she replied, still facing the painting, a Rothko that seemed to pulse with its own inner light, layers of crimson and deep violet that spoke of emotions too complex for words. "I suppose we are both creatures of habit." She heard him move closer, not invasively, but near enough that she could sense his presence. "Though I've wondered if you actually see the paintings anymore, or if you're looking at something else entirely." Elena finally turned, meeting his gaze with the practiced composure she'd perfected over years of board meetings and charity galas. He was more striking up close than she'd allowed herself to acknowledge. Dark eyes that held an unsettling depth, strong features softened by an expression of genuine curiosity rather than the predatory interest she'd learned to deflect from men. He wore his expensive suit like a second skin, tailored perfectly but worn without ostentation. "That's rather presumptuous," she said, her tone neither warm nor cold. "To assume you know what I'm thinking." "You're right. I apologize." He didn't look apologetic, though. He looked patient. "I'm Nathaniel." Nathaniel Cross. The name registered immediately. Cross Industries. Real estate, technology, renewable energy. An empire built with apparently ruthless efficiency by a man who transformed his family's modest construction business into a multinational corporation before his 40th birthday. Elena had read about him in Forbes, had seen him mentioned in the society pages, though he seemed to avoid the spotlight with determined consistency. "I know who you are," she said simply. "Then you have me at a disadvantage." Elena Winters. She offered the information like a business card, crisp and impersonal. "And I do see the paintings. I see them better than most people who rush through here with their audio guides and their need to photograph everything instead of simply experiencing it." A smile touched the corners of his mouth, not the broad, performative kind, but something smaller and more genuine. "I've noticed that about you. The way you stand before each piece. Like you're having a conversation with it. Art should be a conversation. It reveals as much about the viewer as the artist." She paused, then added with deliberate coolness, "Though I'm not certain why we are having this conversation at all." "Because I've wanted to speak with you for 3 months, Nathaniel said with disarming honesty. "And tonight, I finally decided to stop being a coward about it." The admission caught her off guard, breaching the careful wall she maintained. Men her age, in her experience, didn't admit to cowardice. They postured, they pursued, they took. This kind of vulnerability felt like a trap, or perhaps simply unfamiliar territory. "Well," Elena said, gathering her coat and purse with decisive movements. "Now you have. Good evening, Mr. Cross." She walked away before he could respond, her heels clicking against the polished floor with the rhythm of retreat. She didn't look back, though she felt his gaze follow her all the way to the exit. It was only when she reached her car that she realized her hands were trembling. 3 weeks passed before Elena returned to the gallery. She told herself it was because she'd been busy, a half-truth at best. Her architectural firm was indeed demanding, particularly with the new sustainable housing project downtown, but the real reason for her absence was simpler and more cowardly than she cared to admit. She was avoiding Nathaniel Cross. The realization irritated her. She was 47 years old, a successful businesswoman who'd rebuilt her life from the ashes of betrayal. She didn't avoid things. She didn't allow strange men to unsettle her carefully maintained equilibrium. Yet here she was, standing outside the gallery on a rainy Thursday evening, debating whether to go inside like a teenager working up courage for a first date. Ridiculous, she muttered to herself, pushing through the doors. He was there. Of course he was there. Standing before the same Rothko she'd been contemplating that night, his hands clasped behind his back in an attitude of such complete absorption that she almost turned around. Almost. Instead, she found herself drawn to a different section of the gallery, to a series of photographs she'd never paid much attention to before, stark black and white images of urban decay transformed into accidental beauty. Broken windows catching light. Graffiti blooming like flowers on concrete.
Absence rendait visible.
The Salgado series, Nathaniel's voice said from behind her, and she realized he'd followed her. Or perhaps she'd known he would. I've always found them devastating in the most necessary way. They don't let you look away from what's broken. Is that what draws you to them? Elena asked, keeping her eyes on the photographs. The devastation. I think they're about more than devastation. They're about finding beauty in what others have abandoned. About seeing value in things the world has decided are worthless. He moved to stand beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. There's something profoundly human in that. Despite herself, Elena felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the armor she'd so carefully maintained. You speak like someone who's known abandonment. My mother left when I was 8, Nathaniel said quietly. My father threw himself into work and drink, in that order. I was raised by my grandmother in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens while my father built his company and forgot he had a son. So yes, I understand something about being left behind. The honesty was brutal, offered without self-pity or the expectation of sympathy. Elena turned to look at him properly for the first time, seeing past the expensive suit and the reputation to something more complex underneath. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. Don't be. It made me who I am. He met her gaze steadily. Though I've spent most of my adult life trying to understand why the people we love find it so easy to walk away. The words hung between them, weighted with shared understanding. Elena felt exposed in a way she hadn't permitted in years, as if he could see past her carefully curated exterior to the wounded woman beneath. I need to go, she said abruptly. May I walk you to your car? Nathaniel asked. It's dark, and this neighborhood. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I don't doubt that for a moment. His expression remained open, without a trace of offense. I was simply hoping to extend our conversation. Why? The question emerged sharper than she'd intended. What exactly do you want from me, Mr. Cross? Nathaniel, he corrected gently. And I'm not entirely sure yet. I only know that I find you fascinating. The way you move through the world like you're carrying something precious and breakable. The way you look at art like you're searching for answers to questions you won't ask aloud. You don't know anything about me. Then give me the chance to learn. Elena shook her head, something between a laugh and a sigh escaping her lips. I'm 47 years old. I have a daughter in graduate school. I've been divorced for 8 years, and I've worked very hard to build a life that doesn't require anyone else's input or approval. I come to this gallery alone because I prefer it that way. I'm 36, Nathaniel said, his voice steady. I built a company that employs 14,000 people. I've never been married because I've never met anyone who made me want to try. And I come to this gallery alone for the same reason you do, because I found that solitude is easier than disappointment. He paused. Until recently. The implication settled over her like rain, gentle but impossible to ignore. Elena felt panic rising in her throat, not because she didn't understand what he was suggesting, but because part of her wanted to believe it might be real. You're 11 years younger than me, she said, as if stating a fact would somehow protect her. I can count. Then you should understand why this, whatever this is, isn't possible. Should I? Nathaniel asked softly. Or have you simply decided that for both of us? Elena stared at him, at the quiet certainty in his expression, and felt something crumble inside her. You don't know what you're asking for. Then tell me. Have coffee with me. Talk to me. Let me understand. Every instinct she possessed screamed to her to refuse, to maintain the distance that had kept her safe. But there was something in his eyes, a patience that felt like an anchor, a steadiness that suggested he would wait as long as necessary, that made her hesitate. "One coffee," she heard herself say. "Nothing more." The smile that transformed his face was worth the risk of everything. Coffee became walks through the city. Walks became dinners at quiet restaurants where they could talk without interruption. Dinners became museum visits, bookstore browsing, long phone conversations that stretched into the early morning hours. And through it all, Elena fought against the growing attachment she felt blooming in her chest like something dangerous and inevitable. Nathaniel was nothing like she'd expected. He didn't pursue her with the aggressive confidence she associated with wealthy, powerful men. Instead, he simply showed up, consistent, patient, genuinely interested in her thoughts on everything from urban planning to the poetry of Pablo Neruda. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "Tell me about your daughter," he said one evening as they sat in a small Italian restaurant in the West Village. Rain streaked the windows, turning the city outside into an impressionist painting. Elena smiled despite herself. "Maya. She's 25, studying environmental law at Columbia. Brilliant, passionate, absolutely certain she's going to save the world. She sounds like her mother. She's better than her mother. Smarter, less damaged by her own mistakes." Elena took a sip of wine, feeling the familiar ache of pride mixed with regret. "I was pregnant with her at 22, married at 23. Built my entire life around being someone's wife, someone's mother. When the marriage ended, I had to figure out who Elena actually was. I'm still figuring it out." "And who have you discovered?" Nathaniel asked, leaning forward slightly. "Someone tougher than I thought. More capable. More resilient." She paused, also more afraid than I'd like to admit. "Of what?" "Of this." The admission cost her, but she forced herself to continue. "Of allowing someone to matter again. Of being foolish enough to trust my judgment when it failed me so spectacularly before." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Your ex-husband was an idiot who didn't deserve you. That's his failure, not yours." "You don't understand," Elena said, frustration bleeding into her tone. "I gave him everything. 20 years of my life. I mold myself into whatever he needed me to be, and it still wasn't enough. When I discovered the affair, when I learned he'd been with her for 2 years while I'd been planning our anniversary trip, I realized I'd disappeared. I'd become so focused on being what he wanted that I'd lost track of who I actually was. And now you're terrified that could happen again. Now I know better than to risk it." She met his gaze directly. "I'm too old to rebuild myself twice, Nathaniel." "You're not too old for anything," he said with quiet intensity. "You're extraordinary. You're brilliant. You see the world with these incredible eyes that find meaning in everything around you. And yes, you've been hurt. But being hurt doesn't mean you're broken." Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. "You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone. I want you." The simple declaration hung between them, honest and unflinching. "I want your intelligence and your cautiousness and your terrible habit of overthinking everything. I want your silence in museums and your opinions on architecture and the way you drink your coffee with exactly 3 sips before adding more sugar because you can never get it right the first time." "You've been paying attention," she whispered. "Elena, I've been paying attention since the first moment I saw you. You were standing in front of a Mark Rothko, and you looked like you were trying to walk inside the painting. Like if you looked hard enough, you could find the answer to something you were afraid to ask." He reached across the table, his hand open in invitation but not demanding. "I've spent 3 months learning the geography of your defenses, and I'm not going anywhere." She stared at his outstretched hand, at the promise and the risk it represented. Everything in her life had taught her to protect herself, to maintain distance, to never again give someone the power to shatter her. But here was this man offering something different, not possession but partnership, not consumption but genuine connection. Slowly, Elena placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I know," Nathaniel said, "but I'm patient. And I'm not your ex-husband. I don't need you to be anything other than exactly who you are. It was perhaps the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, not because it was flowery or poetic, but because it was true. 3 months into whatever they were building, Elena refused to call it a relationship, though that's clearly what it had become. Reality intruded with the force of a freight train. It started with a photograph. Elena was having lunch with her daughter Maya when the younger woman's expression shifted from animated to concerned as she scrolled through her phone. The kind of concerned that meant trouble. "Mom," Maya said carefully, turning her screen around. "Is this you?" The image was grainy but unmistakable. Elena and Nathaniel leaving a theater, his hand at the small of her back, her face tilted up toward his with an expression of unguarded happiness. The headline beneath read, "Billionaire Nathaniel crosses mystery woman, age gap romance or midlife crisis." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She'd known this was possible. Nathaniel was too prominent to date in complete privacy, but seeing it rendered in tabloid speculation made it viscerally real. Worse were the comments scrolling beneath, a toxic mixture of judgment and prurient curiosity. Gold digger trying to trap a younger man. She's old enough to be his mother. Disgusting. Must be using some serious tricks to keep him interested. Mom. Maya's voice cut through the spiral of shame threatening to overwhelm her. Are you okay? I need to go, Elena said, gathering her things with shaking hands. Mom, wait. Who is this guy? Why didn't you tell me you were seeing someone? Because it's not. Elena stopped, unsure how to explain what Nathaniel was to her. It's complicated, sweetheart. Maya's expression softened. He looks at you like you hung the moon. That's not complicated. That's rare. She paused. Don't let those trolls get in your head. They're just jealous because you're gorgeous and apparently dating a billionaire who's clearly crazy about you. Elena managed a weak smile, but the damage was done. The comments had crystallized every fear she'd been trying to ignore. The age difference that she could almost forget when they were alone together became glaring in the harsh light of public scrutiny. She wasn't just dating someone younger, she was dating someone who could have his pick of women, someone whose reputation she could damage simply by existing in his orbit. By the time she got home, her phone was exploding with texts from friends who'd seen the article, from business associates offering concern or barely veiled curiosity. But it was her ex-husband's message that cut deepest. Really, Elena? A boy young enough to be your son? I thought you had more dignity than that. She stared at the words, feeling the old wounds tear open. Richard had left her for a woman 15 years younger, but somehow her relationship with Nathaniel, a grown man, successful and autonomous, was the undignified one. The hypocrisy was staggering, but it still hurt. When Nathaniel called, she didn't answer. When he texted, she left him on read. For 3 days, she retreated into the fortress of a solitude, convincing herself that ending things now was the kindest option for both of them. On the 4th day, he showed up at her office. Elena's assistant tried to warn her, but Nathaniel was already through the door, looking rumpled and determined in a way she'd never seen him before. His usual composure was frayed at the edges, replaced by something rawer and more urgent. You're avoiding me, he said without preamble. I'm Busse. Elena didn't look up from her laptop, though she'd stopped being able to focus on the screen the moment he walked in. Elena, look at me. Please. The please did it. She raised her eyes to find him standing in front of her desk, hands shoved in his pockets, looking younger than his 36 years and somehow more real for it. I saw the article, he said. I know what people are saying. Then you understand why this needs to end. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I won't be your midlife crisis. I won't be the older woman who trapped you or whatever narrative they're constructing. I don't give a damn what they're saying. Well, I do. The words burst out of her with unexpected force. I care that they're calling me a gold digger and speculating about what sexual favors I must be providing to keep you interested. I care that my ex-husband thinks I'm pathetic and my colleagues are gossiping and now their silences were shared rather than solitary. And when Elena looked at the Rothko that had been her companion through so many lonely months, she no longer saw only layers of pain and beauty. She saw the possibility. She saw hope. She saw the reflection of a woman who had learned, finally, that being loved didn't require being perfect, only being brave enough to let someone see you completely. The studio was everything Elena had imagined and more. 3 walls of windows flooded the space with northern light, perfect for the detailed architectural work she loved. Her drafting table sat in the center, surrounded by the organized chaos of her creative process, rolled blueprints, fabric swatches, sketches pinned to cork boards. The small fireplace crackled softly in the corner, taking the edge off the autumn chill that had settled over the mountains. Elena stood at the window, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, watching the leaves turn gold and crimson in the morning sun. She was 49 now, and the silver in her hair had spread like frost through the dark strands. She no longer tried to hide it. Nathaniel said it made her look like a queen, and she'd learned to believe him. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made her turn. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, rumpled from sleep, carrying his own mug of coffee and the newspaper. He'd aged too in the past 2 years, fine lines at the corners of his eyes, a few threads of grey at his temples, but he wore it well. More importantly, he seemed lighter somehow, as if loving and being loved had lifted a burden he'd carried for too long. "You're up early," he said, crossing to stand behind her, one arm wrapping around her waist as he pressed a kiss to her temple. "Couldn't sleep. Too many ideas." She gestured at the drafting table, where preliminary sketches for a new sustainable housing project were taking shape. The city approved the waterfront development. "We start breaking ground in the spring." "That's wonderful." His pride in her accomplishments was genuine, never tinged with competition or resentment. It was one of the thousands of small ways he showed her that this partnership was real. "We should celebrate." "We should work," Elena corrected, but she was smiling. "You have that conference call with the Tokyo office at 10. Rescheduled to Monday. I told them I had something more important to do. More important than a multimillion-dollar deal. Much more important." Nathaniel turned her to face him, his expression serious despite the warmth in his eyes. "I wanted today to be just us. No work, no obligations. Just us and the mountains and whatever we feel like doing." Elena studied his face, noting the hint of nervousness beneath his casual tone. "What's going on?" "Nothing's going on. Can't a man want to spend a quiet Saturday with the woman he loves?" "He can, but you're terrible at being casual when you're planning something." She narrowed her eyes. "What did you do? Why do you assume I did something?" "Because I know you." And she did. 2 years of falling asleep beside him, waking up to his face, learning the topography of his moods and tells and habits. She knew when he was stressed about work, when he was tired but pushing through, when he was planning a surprise. "So what is it? Did you invite people over without telling me?" "Because, Nathaniel, I'm in sweatpants and I haven't showered." "No people. I promise." He took both her hands in his, a gesture that had become familiar and beloved. "But I did do something. And before you get upset, just hear me out." Elena felt her heart rate pick up. "You're making me nervous." "Good. That makes 2 of us." Nathaniel took a deep breath, and suddenly Elena understood. The nervousness, the cleared schedule, the way he was looking at her like she was both terrifying and essential. She knew what was coming, and her breath caught in her throat. "Elena Winters," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath. "I've spent the last 2 years learning what it means to really love someone. Not the fairy tale version, not the easy version, but the real, complicated, beautiful version where you choose each other every single day." "Nathaniel. Please, let me finish. I need to say this." He squeezed her hands gently. "You've taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours. Someone whose damage doesn't scare you because you understand that being broken and being whole aren't mutually exclusive. Someone who makes you want to be brave." Tears were already streaming down Elena's face, but she didn't try to wipe them away. "If you're about to do what I think you're about to do." "I'm 50 years old," Nathaniel continued, ignoring her interruption with a slight smile. "Wait, no. 38. I'm 38. You're 49, which makes you 11 years older than me, and I don't care. I didn't care when we met, I don't care now, and I won't care when we are 80 and 91 respectively." Despite her tears, Elena laughed. "Your math is showing." "My point is showing." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made Elena's heart stop entirely. "My point is that age is just a number, and what we have is rare. What we've built together, this trust, this partnership, this life, it's the most real thing I've ever known. And I want to keep building it with you for as long as you'll have me." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was perfect in its simplicity, a single diamond set in platinum, elegant and timeless. Not ostentatious, not trying to prove anything. Just beautiful. Elena Winters, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice when you decided to be brave? Will you design houses with me and argue about art with me and grow old with me, whatever that looks like? For a long moment, Elena couldn't speak. Every fear she'd ever had rose up in her throat, the voice that said she was too old, too damaged, too complicated. The voice that whispered this couldn't last, that he would wake up one day and regret choosing her. But louder than those fears was a different voice. The voice that had been growing stronger over the past 2 years, nurtured by Nathaniel's consistent devotion and her own hard-won self-acceptance. The voice that said she deserved this. That she was enough. That being loved completely was not something to fear but something to embrace. Yes, she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll choose you back every single day, for as long as we have. Nathaniel's smile was incandescent. His hand shook slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, because of course he'd somehow figured out her size without her knowing. Then he was pulling her close, and she was wrapping her arms around him, and they were both crying and laughing in equal measure. I love you, he said against her hair. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes. Good, Elena replied, pulling back to cup his face in her hands. That means it's real. That means it matters. They stood there in her studio, with the morning light pouring through the windows and the mountains standing witness, and Elena felt something she'd thought lost forever, absolute certainty. Not certainty that life would be easy, or that they would never struggle, or that love alone would solve everything, but certainty that this man, this partnership, this brave choice to let someone in, it was right. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, standing alone in a gallery, convinced that solitude was safety and that her story was already written. She thought about how close she'd come to walking away from this, from him, because fear had whispered that she wasn't worthy. Thank you, she said softly. Nathaniel pulled back slightly, confusion crossing his features. For what? For not giving up. For being patient when I was difficult. For seeing past all my defenses to the person underneath. She touched the ring on her finger, still getting used to its weight. For teaching me that it's never too late to choose love. That being 49 and scared and scarred by the past doesn't mean you're too old for happiness. You taught yourself that, Nathaniel said firmly. I just had the privilege of being here while you figured it out. And Elena, for the record, you're not too old for anything. You're exactly the right age to be exactly who you are. Perfect and imperfect and absolutely remarkable. They spent the rest of the day doing nothing particularly momentous. They made breakfast together, laughing when Elena burned the toast and Nathaniel oversalted the eggs. They walked through the woods, hand in hand, talking about wedding plans and whether to have a small ceremony or elope entirely. They sat on the deck as afternoon faded to evening, sharing wine and comfortable silence. And later, much later, when they were lying in bed with the windows open and the sound of the forest drifting in on the cool night air, Elena turned to Nathaniel with sudden intensity. I need you to understand something, she said. Okay. He shifted to face her fully, always giving her his complete attention. I'm going to have moments where the fear comes back, where I worry that I'm holding you back or that you're going to regret this, where the voice in my head tells me I'm not enough. She paused, gathering her courage. When that happens, I need you to remind me why we are doing this. I need you to be patient while I work through it. Can you do that? Elena, I can do that every day for the rest of our lives if necessary. Nathaniel took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. But I also need you to understand something. Those moments when you doubt yourself, they're the moments when I love you most. Because they're when you're being most honest, most vulnerable, most real. And I didn't fall in love with some perfect version of you. I fell in love with all of it, the confidence and the doubt, the strength and the fear, the certainty and the questions. Even when I'm difficult. Especially when you're difficult. Easy is boring. You are never boring. Elena smiled, feeling the fear recede like a tide going out. I love you, Nathaniel Cross. My too young, too patient, too perfect for me fiancé. And I love you, Elena Winter soon-to-be Cross. My too cautious, too brilliant, absolutely perfect period fiancé. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the knowledge that love, real love, the kind that lasted, wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who saw you completely and chose to stay anyway. Someone who understood that being enough wasn't about being flawless, but about being honest, about showing up, about choosing courage over fear, again and again and again.